Jim Crow laws. Slavery had a long history in the British colonies and the United States. After the Civil War, the 13th Amendment was passed in 1865, banning slavery. In the South, lawmakers enacted laws known as the Black Codes, which limited the freedom of Black people and often made them dependent on their former slave owners. However, in the late 1860s and early 1870s, the 14th and 15th Amendment gave protection to former slaves and gave Black men the right to vote. A decade called the Reconstruction brought back people into public life and public office across the country. But in the South, white supremacists still fought to ensure that discrimination would continue, and the Jim Crow laws were created and spread across the country in the 1870s and 1880s. Jim Crow laws legalized segregation and were meant to make it difficult or impossible for Black people to vote, hold jobs, or have an equal education. Anyone who did not follow these laws faced arrest, fines, and violence. Threats of violence came from all directions, but one of the most ruthless organizations was the Ku Klux Klan, or the KKK, a secret society who terrorized Black people. Members would burn crosses on the lawns of Black families as a threat, and would murder Black people who supposedly broke laws, often by hanging them, which is known as lynching. Segregation under the Jim Crow laws meant that there were separate areas for Black people and white people in waiting rooms, buses, elevators, and everywhere that was public, as well as separate schools, drinking fountains, bathrooms, and other facilities. These laws made it nearly impossible for Black people to get a quality education, participate in politics, or make a livable wage. In 1886, in a case called Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation was legal, so long as the separate facilities were equal. However, the facilities were rarely actually equal. An example of a Jim Crow laws is that in Florida, if a Black person, biracial person, or other person of color were to enter the part of a vehicle set aside for white people, it would be a misdemeanor that could result in whipping or other punishment. In Washington, D.C., there were white sections of the city, and property in these sections could not be sold to a person of color. In South Carolina, it was illegal for people of different races to work together in the same room, use the same bathrooms, or even go through the same doors or hallways at the same time. In Alabama, a white person and a person of color could not play games together like basketball or pool. It would take 60 years for these separate but equal facilities to be challenged and changed.